All right. Good morning, everyone. Once again, I'm David Severance. Delighted to be with you this morning. I'm one of the coaches here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Delighted to talk with you about a topic that I think is really important that kind of gets overlooked. It's one of those things like flossing your teeth and eating your vegetables. You know you ought to be doing it, but you may not be doing it as much as you ought to be, or something like that. And it's all about getting feedback from your clients. I'd like to start off by just asking a simple question. Please put yes or no or kind of whatever in the chat box. The question is, do you have a structured, organized process for getting consistent feedback from your clients? Please type yes, no, maybe, something like that in the chat box. Okay, no, no, nope, no, working on it. Okay, fine. Just getting started. Terrific. So this is what I find in a lot of teams that I work with is we all care about the client experience. We want the client to have a good experience with us, but we don't necessarily have a process for ensuring that we know exactly how the client is experiencing our service. And some of us may do something in kind of a haphazard way. We may ask a client once in a while, hey, how's it all going so far? Or we may ask them after the closing, was this a good experience for you? And of course they say, yeah, you're the best. We love you. Boy, do I love you so much. You're so wonderful. But it's not perhaps in an organized way. And so we may be missing some of the opportunity to understand what the experience is like for the client. And I find that most teams, even though they care about great service or great delivery of value, this is an area that we usually don't have a developed plan for kind of ensuring. So what we're going to talk about today is this topic of feedback, what it is, and some ways that you can get it from your clients. The good news is it doesn't cost any money, doesn't have to take a lot of time, but if you do it right and do it well, the value is priceless. So I really want to encourage everybody to take at least one thing or two things out of today's conversation that you can apply in your business to be more profitable, provide better service, and eventually, obviously, get better referrals and more leads, and et cetera, out of it. So let me share a screen here. I'll show a few slides today. Okay, can everybody see the slide deck? Yes, Corey? Yes, okay, great, thank you. Okay, the topic of feedback. How to get feedback from your clients. We want to first explore, what does feedback mean? And then we'll talk about when you can ask for feedback, or a couple of opportunities that you might have to have a feedback conversation with clients. When I ask teams or team leaders why they don't get more feedback from clients, most of the time they say, I'm not really sure how to do it. Or if they're being honest, they'll say, I'm kind of afraid I'll hear something negative and I don't want to hear that, so I avoid it. It's kind of like you don't go to the dentist because you're afraid they might find a cavity or something. So let's start by asking one simple question. What is feedback? When we use the word feedback, a lot of people, if I ask you, what does it mean? People say, well, it's kind of like they tell you how you're doing, or they give you information about how you're doing. And that's true. But feedback comes in many different forms. It can be a verbal communication with someone. It could be an email. It could be a survey. It could even be something in the form of a report like Insights. Insights fundamentally is a feedback tool. And here's how we define feedback here. Feedback is information or data that you can use to make good decisions. In the most broad sense, feedback is any information that allows you to make any important decision. For example, the gas gauge on your car is a feedback device. It tells you how much gas is in the tank, and you can use that information to make a good decision as to whether to get more gas or not. Surprisingly, my dad once told me he had a 1951 Volkswagen Bug and there was no gas gauge in it. And I said, well, how did you know when to get gas? And he said, well, everybody knew that it got about 20 miles to the gallon and it had a 10-gallon tank. So you'd go about 200 miles and then you'd stop and get gas. Well, today we couldn't think of having a car without a gas gauge. That feedback is so important to how we use cars. And in a sense, it should be the same thing in our business, but it isn't. So feedback is information that we can use to make good decisions. The question is, how do we get it? What's the best way for us to get that information? When should we have it? How do we get it in a way that can help us turn it into something that builds our business? So thinking about why feedback may be valuable to you, there's kind of three major things here. First and foremost is it gives you an insight into how your client is experiencing your service. Now, clients often tell us, hey, yeah, everything's good. I'm glad you're my agent. You do good service. Thank you. Thank you. But when we ask questions of them, rather than just wait for them to say something to us, we can ask a lot more questions than they might be willing to share with us if we didn't ask them. So it gives us an opportunity to get a much fuller picture of what their experience is like. Second, it helps you explore other ways to do your work better. And this is really important. Many of us ask the first kind of question, which is, how am I doing? How do you like the service that you're getting from me? The person says, fine. But there's a second piece to this. We'll talk more about this in a minute. The second piece is, how can I do it better? What would be better for you than what I'm giving you right now? You may score me a 9 out of 10. I'd like to know what it would be, what it would take to make it a 10. And as we're all committed to our clients having a great experience, these are important questions to ask. And third, this is really important. This is a demonstration to your client that how they're experiencing your service is important to you. We all say it. We all say our clients are first, our clients are number one, clients are king, whatever you want to say. But when you actually take time out of the business of trying to buy or sell the home to really ask the client how he or she is experiencing everything, you're demonstrating, you're proving that how they feel about it is important enough for you to set time aside for that. It's not so often that we can actually prove to clients how much we care. And we think, well, if we just give them good service and we follow up and all that, that'll prove it. And in a sense, that's true. But in another sense, when you say it's really important for me to understand how you're experiencing my service, can we talk about it for a few minutes? What you're saying to them in a very overt way is, your experience matters to me. So we talk about two times that you can get feedback, or two opportunities to get feedback, if you will. What we call spur of the moment opportunities and predefined opportunities. A spur of the moment opportunity is anytime you feel you'd like to get a little feedback on something. It's not planned, it's not scheduled, it's just an opportunity to ask a question or two. A predefined time might be one where you're setting aside the time ahead of time as part of a plan to get information. So for some people, it's within 24 hours of the closing or 48 hours of closing. All my clients get a survey and we look at the survey results and we get them back. That's a predefined time. For other people, it could be another predefined time, which is, how about 30 days after you first become someone's agent? Schedule some time to check in with them then. So a good feedback process involves both of these. Most teams that we've worked with, that I've worked with, don't have both of these. They may do it spur of the moment from time to time, or they may have some kind of a predetermined time where they want to send out a survey or something like that, but they don't do both. And honestly, each has its own kind of value. And so it's useful to have both as part of whatever your strategy is. So as you leave today's call and you think about, how could I put something into practice here for myself? What could be my strategy or my plan? Think of having at least one predefined time, and make sure that you remember at other times to ask some spur of the moment questions. So let me just ask a question in the chat box. How many of you have a predetermined time to gather feedback from others? You know ahead of time you're going to send out a survey after closing or at some other stage in the process where it's predefined. Please type yes in the chat box if you have that. And I'll need somebody's help to read the chat box.
I got it, David.
Oh, you there, Rachel? Great, perfect. So let me know what we're getting.
So we got a lot of yeses, a couple yeses, no, and then a not.
All right. For those of you who are yeses, please add when. What is the time? What's the predetermined time for you? Let's hear what people have to say.
So Morgan and Heidi were the only two yeses. So Heidi says she does it after closing 48 hours.
Okay. Okay, so our experience is that most people do it after closing, which is a perfectly logical time to do it, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, there's two problems with it. One is they're done with the transaction, and so they may not feel the urge to answer the questions in the same way they would if they were still in the middle of the process with you. Second, if you were to try to find out what it is that they did not like about your service, and you ask a question like, what could I have done better or what could I have done differently? You'll get an answer and you'll be able to apply the learning from that answer with your next client, but not that client. If you had asked the same questions halfway through the process, at least you could make theoretically the adjustment at that time and help have that person have a 10 out of 10 experience rather than a 9 out of 10 experience. So, as I say, nothing wrong with asking for feedback at that stage. And if that's convenient and easy for you and you can get some good information from clients out of it, by all means do it. But it should be more than that. And so you have the opportunity after today's call to think about how else you might structure something for yourselves. Okay, so here's some best practices. 5 things you can think about. Each one is important in its own right. You put them all together, and it's pretty easy to have a process here that can work. First, you need a strategy. What we're talking about today is coming up with a plan, an approach that's integrated. So maybe your approach is within 30 days of first becoming an agent, you're going to set aside 5 to 10 minutes to talk with your client about how things are going so far. Or maybe when you get to some later stage that's a predictable stage for you in the way that you work with your clients, you're going to spend a little time then. Maybe it's a tricky time. You're just entering into negotiations and you want to get some feedback from the client just before that starts or just after the negotiation stuff gets going, something like that. Think about what your strategy is and make sure that you're going to stick with it. And you don't have to write anything in stone. Anything that you try after today's call, you can try for a few months, try it with a number of clients, see if it's getting you the information that you want to have. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So first, you need a strategy. You can't just do it in a haphazard way. Second, invite your client. Say to your client something like, your experience, your satisfaction is so important to me that I want to make sure I'm delivering on everything that you want and need. Therefore, I'd like to set aside a little bit of time next time we meet next Tuesday to talk about that. Would that be all right with you? What you're saying to the client is, you matter to me. And if you don't mind me taking a few minutes in our relationship to make it about my time rather than everything for you, even though fundamentally feedback is to help me serve you, asking for them to give you a little bit of time. And so it's so valuable. You invite them into the process. They certainly say, sure, I'd love to do that. And then they're ready for it when it comes. Third, it's really important to develop the questions ahead of time that you want answers to. You shouldn't go into any feedback moment, whether it's a spur of the moment feedback conversation or it's a predetermined time where you're going to send out a survey or an email or have a phone call or whatever, without already knowing which questions you want to ask. And so we'll give you a few examples that you can use or adapt to your own particular needs, or at least they'll kind of inspire you to think of another question. Have them out on a piece of paper, think about them in the next couple of weeks. Make sure that they are the right questions that you want to ask when the time comes so you're not fumbling around. Fourth, 2 things to focus on in these questions. Focus on understanding the current experience of the client and what would make it better. What are options that could be better from the client's point of view? Doesn't mean you have to say yes to them, doesn't mean you have to accede to every wish or dream that the client has. But exploring the options of possibilities to do something differently, like making a phone call versus sending an email, communicating more often, communicating less often, providing more information like collections or insights or some other tool that you have available, are all ways that you might do things differently if the client gives you guidance in that direction. And finally, also important, say a heartfelt thank you. You've taken a few minutes of your client's time, and the best that you can do at that point is to say thank you. Especially if it's negative feedback, it's maybe a little bit hard to do, but you should say thank you anyway. One of the things that dissuades us from asking these kinds of questions or having these conversations is we're afraid we'll hear something negative. And sometimes we do. But no matter what, the best thing you can say is thank you. You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to defend anything. You don't say, I do it this way because blah, 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 blah. This is why you should do it the way I'm telling you to do it rather than the way you're telling me to do it, right? You don't want to get into a conversation like that. Simply say, thank you. This is very important to me, and I'm going to do the best I can with all this information. Something like that. Okay, so here's some questions you can ask. Now, these are just ideas. I'm not saying that these are the right questions for you or these are the best questions to ask. We're just using them as examples here for this morning's discussion. So as you look at the questions, you can think about them. One may be one that's a good fit for the way that you talk with your clients, or maybe not. Maybe you'll need to adapt one of these questions into your own kind of way of speaking and communicating with clients. That's perfectly fine. Or maybe you have other questions that are already kind of on your mind about how you want to get information. But remember, the information, the questions are asked according to this fourth bullet point here, understanding the current experience and exploring options about how to do better. So here are some examples. Spur of the moment, if you're just going to ask your client, hey, how's everything going so far? So maybe you just had a meeting, you've talked things over, you've met a few times so far, maybe you've talked about a collection or something that you put together for the client. You can just take a moment. How's everything going so far? Well, I really like how your responsiveness. You've been really good to me. So far it's every time I've asked you for something, you've gotten right back to me, and I really like that. Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Or a second question, how is this process working for you so far? Basically the same question, slightly differently. Third, am I giving you what you want and need? This particular question for me goes back to early in my career. I worked in one of the airlines, and we were putting thousands of our clients into the Sheraton New York hotel at that time. Big hotel, over 2,000 rooms, major hotel in a major city. And they had clients from all over the world, and we were one important client among many. The guy who ran the hotel at that time, every time I saw him, I was in the hotel, 2 or 3 days a week doing something with our clients. And we worked with all the departments in the hotel, the front office and food and beverage and security and all of them. And whenever I pass him in the hallway or bump into somewhere, he always say, hey, David, how are you doing? Fine. And then he would always ask this question, am I giving you what you want and need? Actually, he would say, are we giving you what you want and need? And most of the time my answer was yes, everything's great. Sometimes I'd say, no, we've got a little problem with security. Somebody got their room broken into or whatever. And he would always respond and say, okay, let me work on it. I'll get back to you this afternoon or whatever. Every time he asked me that question. And it was clear to me that nothing mattered more to him than me having everything I want and need as a client. So you don't have to ask this question, but it does indicate how important it is to the client, to the client, that you care about what their experience is. Last two questions. Is there anything I could do differently that would be better for you? Or to ask it in a different way, what could I do differently that would be better for you? You see, the first question, is there anything, is a yes/no question. Is there anything I could do differently that would be better for you? Yes. They may not say anymore. Then you have to ask the second question, well, what would that be? Different way to ask the question is, what could I do differently that would be better for you? So you'll notice these first three questions are all about the current experience. The last two questions are about exploring options. So as we said on the previous slide, what you want to get at is what's the current experience and what would be a better experience. And so in this particular set of questions, the first three are all about how the person is experiencing the service right now. And the second two are about what would be better. So here's some spur of the moment questions. So let me give you a few questions that you might ask as part of a predefined time. Could be a survey that you send out, could be a simple questionnaire. Similar questions, maybe worded a little bit differently, it doesn't really matter. How satisfied are you with how everything's gone so far? And this could be a what we call a forced choice question, where you could put some boxes. You could say, very unsatisfied, somewhat unsatisfied, neutral, satisfied, very satisfied, or just leave it blank and just see what the person puts into the space. What do you like most about how we're working together? That's a very interesting thing because it helps you see what they value most. You're giving them a lot. You're giving them information, you're giving them responsiveness, you're giving them knowledge of the market. And sometimes you may not be 100% clear, or you may misperceive what is most valuable to them. And so asking this question, what do you like most about how we're working together, gives you an idea of what they value highly. How's our communication process working for you? That's an open-ended question. Another way to ask it would be, would you like more communication, less, or is it about right? Or you could put those two questions together. Finally, how helpful are tools like collections and insights to navigating this process? So you may have shown them a collection, you may have talked about some insights stuff, shared a report or something. That stuff may be very interesting and valuable to them, maybe less so, you don't know. But there are a lot of questions that you can ask that help you understand how they are experiencing every part of what your experience with them is. So let me just take one moment here as a timeout to ask you guys, who has a killer question that you often ask your clients that gives you good information? Please type it into the chat box. What's a question that you typically ask in these situations?
Heidi says, I find with most, if I fill out the survey, they don't add additional comments. I also find many don't like to fill out surveys.
Okay, got it. So maybe that's not the process for your clients, right? Maybe it's better to be a face-to-face conversation, for example. Thank you. Anybody else? What's the question that you like to ask your clients? Boy, not a whole lot of asking going on here. Go ahead.
Josh says, after taking the leadership class, I recently asked a client if there's anything else I can be doing for them. Heidi says she also, and Josh says it went really well. Heidi says, she asks, do you understand the process?
Got it. Another great question. Sometimes people are lost. Maybe it's their first time buying a house, or maybe it's different from what they've experienced in the past. And just checking in with something like that, do you understand what's happening here? Do you need more information about it? Can be very useful. Anything else?
Looks like there's not a lot of whole feedback question asking, David.
Pretty interesting. So
Good opportunity.
it's what we find so often is when we step back from the business a little bit and say, what should I be doing for my business to make it successful? This is one of the things that comes up, but when it comes to actually putting it into practice, it's a little bit of a challenge. So let me ask you in the chat box, actually, let me ask someone to come off mute here. The question is, what is it that holds you back from having a good and effective feedback process or program with your clients? Since we're not getting a lot of folks here saying that they're doing a lot of it, I'm just curious, what holds you back?
Ryan, go ahead. Were you raising your hand?
Go ahead, Ryan, please. Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's just not having it laid out ahead of time and prepared and ready to go. Not having the system, and not having a time defined. This is when we're going to do the feedback, asking for reviews. It's just got to be predefined.
Yep, thank you. So as we said in one of the slides earlier, it's important to have a strategy ahead of time. And it should be a mixture of the predefined times and any spur of the moment that just seems like a good time to get a little information from clients. Thank you. Who else? What holds you back from having a good and effective, useful process for getting feedback?
I think sometimes I don't want it to sound like it's more of a salesy kind of pitch, and it kind of removes like a personal experience. I think with some of them, I think it's, with different personality types. I'm working with some older couple now, and I just asked them the other day because I suggested some repairs and things that we needed to do. And I just asked her, do you trust me? And she said 100%. And I said, well, then trust me that we need to do this. And she says, okay, just do it. So we did it. So I think it just depends, but I hate asking for that feedback thing sometimes because I think with some clients, it takes it to not a personal level.
Yep, understood. So that's pretty common. A lot of folks will have that perspective. Remember that it's important for you to invite your client into the process, and not every client may want to participate with you that way. You can simply say at the very beginning, the best way to do this is at the beginning of the process. When you first become their agent or when you're pitching them or something like that, you can say, it's important for me to understand that you're completely satisfied throughout this process. And therefore, from time to time, I'd like to be able to ask you how it's going and how I can make sure that I'm satisfying all of your needs. Would you be comfortable with that? And most clients would say yes. And if they do, then absolutely, they know it's coming, and then you could put it into action when the time is right. If some people say, I'm really not comfortable with that, that's fine. And they may not be comfortable with that at the very beginning of the relationship if they don't know you. It may be that you go through the relationship a little bit and you build the relationship, you build some trust with them, and a month or so into it or 2 months into it, you say to them, hey, by the way, would it be all right if we just set aside 5 minutes next time we're together on next Tuesday or Wednesday, just so I can check in with you and make sure that you're getting everything you want and need, or use whatever words make sense for you. So again, you're inviting the person to join you. And if they say yes, then that means they want to be a part of it and they won't be surprised when the time comes. Let's hear from one more person.
Therese says, to help me be a better agent, is there anything you think I could have done better during the selling process?
Great.
This is happening after closing.
Yep, got it. So to help me be a better agent, is there anything I could have done differently? Wonderful. That's the essential question, right? Is what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? How would it have been better or different for you if I had done this versus that? That's essentially the question here. And remember that when you ask feedback of people, not everyone is a perfect information supplier. In a sense, you're kind of like fishing. If you ask these questions to a bunch of different people, some will give you really great information. Others maybe less so. They might just be, you're fine. Yep, thanks, you're great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say? Nope, that's it. Okay, so you didn't get much information from that person. That's all right. But you will get something that's crucial from someone else. Just one piece of feedback sometimes is crucial. Imagine if you think you're the most responsive person on earth and you think that the way you're getting back to clients and following up is exactly what anyone in the world would want. And what if you heard from 2 different clients within a short period of time that you're really not measuring up to what they expect? That could be a game changer for you, because suddenly what you didn't know about yourself becomes known, right? You bring this into like your known self-awareness, and suddenly you realize you're not the great follow-upper that you thought you were, at least from the client's point of view. And so if you can probe this a little bit, well, what would you want? Well, I would have liked to have talked to you more frequently. Oh, really? I didn't realize that. Okay, thanks for telling me. Or, you know what? I had a real problem with blah, 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 and you didn't get back to me until the next day. And so, okay, maybe you learned something. The point here is feedback is a gift. Understanding how clients experience you and experience your service is the most valuable thing you can do for your business. People who are successful, like our partner Amit here, they'll all say the same thing, which is focus on the relationships and the business will come. And so often we focus our effort in the business on selling to this number of sales or this GCI or whatever the financial number is. And that's all good, but it doesn't come without relationship. And many, many people who've been successful, not just in this business, but in many businesses, will say, focus on the relationship and the business will be there. So in the spirit of feedback, I would like to ask all of you to provide some feedback right now. I have 2 questions. Please feel free to answer either one. First question is, has today's discussion been helpful to you in thinking about feedback? That's a yes or no question. And 2, how could I make a conversation like this more valuable to you? So you'll notice my 2 questions are exactly the type that we talked about before. The first one is, how are you experiencing it? Is it valuable? Second one is exploring options. How could I make a conversation like this more valuable to you next time around? So please feel free to answer either one.
Everybody say, we got a lot of yeses, very helpful. Ryan says he would love to receive information on turning feedback into 5-star reviews on platforms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Ryan. Let's keep that in mind and see if we can have another conversation about that at some point. Yep, thank you. That's great feedback. See what I mean about some people give you really good feedback? You never know. So thank you for that.
And Donald says it would be great if we could get some continued education on this subject, some maybe follow-ups that we could send out, David.
Okay, got it. Donald, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you to learn a little bit more about what else you might want to know, and whether you want some scripts or something like that, and we can think about how we can provide that. And then if we can do it for you, certainly we want to do it for everybody. So send us an email and we'll see how we can follow up.
This is really good, David, because we have a lot of people who want to talk about turning feedback into reviews on various platforms. So maybe that can be a future session we do.
Okay, got it? Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Okay, everybody, so it's 10 o'clock. Please take what we've talked about here this morning and think about one step that you can take to give yourself more of a program for getting feedback rather than a I'll get to it when I get to it kind of a thing. Nothing is more important than being sure about how your client experiences your business, and finding out one way that you can give your client more value not only translates to value for that client, but to everyone who comes after. So thanks for being with us this morning, everybody. Glad to see everyone. Get out there, do some great work today, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everyone. Have
Thank
a
you.
terrific weekend.
Have a great weekend.